Welcome to everyone. This is our third online discussion. We're talking about what does Black Lives Matter mean in Europe. My name is Ojieko Wabuzo. I'm a Senior Research Officer at ENAR, which is the European Network Against Racism, and I'm also a PhD candidate. So today we have three ENAR members with us, and I will introduce them, and if they can just say hi so that people know who you are. So first of all, we have Shaban Jah, from the European Network of Women of African Descent. If you just give a wave, yes, okay. Next, we have Liban Sheikh from Anti-Racist Forum in Finland. Hi, Liban. And last but not least, we have Stella Nyanchama Okemwa from Hand in Hand Against Racism. Hi, Stella. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us again to have this really important discussion. And just to give people an idea, we have two people based in Belgium. So that's me and Stella. And we have Shaban from Spain. And we have Liban from Finland. So another really quite good geographical spread that we have today. So we're live on Facebook, also on Twitter and YouTube. And as I said, this is a third in our series of online discussions. And we've already had some discussions on people's initial thoughts, feelings, emotions after they heard about the death, about the police killing of George Floyd. We've already asked questions of, how people heard about this, what they were doing at the time. We've started to have discussions around people's feelings around the uprising and all the movement that's been taking place across Europe. But we've started in the last couple of weeks to also see some changes and some developments regarding policies, some announcements that have happened even in Brussels. We've had a new European Parliament resolution on anti-racism. Today, I think, in fact, in Brussels, the European commissioners will be talking about structural racism. And there have been national announcements, policy announcements, or people who are policy makers making announcements around anti-racism. So there are so many developments happening so fast. I think in this discussion, it would be really important to, again, talk about the work that we are doing in the anti-racist network, what we've been doing for many years and what we hope to continue to do, but also to start to articulate what the potential solutions might be. How can we move forward? What are our demands? What would we like to see? How can we vision for a new future? So I will say that and start the questions. And I'm going to start, first of all, with Shaban. As I said, we've been discussing what Black Lives Matters means in Europe. And I know that you have supported a call for the UN to take action on police violence. So I kind of have two questions in one. What has been your work around that so far? And also, if you could give us an idea of what gender and race and how it's significant to this discussion. If you could unmute, then that would be great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ojieko. Yes, I believe this is the time for us, and the time is now. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to tell you what we have been doing around the Black Lives Matter protesting and the resolution that we supported with the UN on police brutality and police violence, both in the US and also in Europe. So we are a bit disappointed, I must say, personally, and also as an organization or as a network, because actually the resolution that we wanted was two major things that should be in there. One is accountability, and two is a commission of inquiry that will give the High Commission power to report human rights violations and police brutalities in the US and Europe and elsewhere around the world. But this was watered down, unfortunately, just one day before it was voted. So, but despite this, we managed to get most of the countries that were really key to this resolution to actually do the vote, except that the Trump administration was really working behind the scenes, like you will expect, calling almost all the African 54 nations one by one, threatening them on phone, and even threatening to cost financial aid to them. As you know, most of the states actually depend, or these countries depend on the United States and the Western European countries a lot for their own economies and their own people. So in the end, they managed to water the resolution down, and not including the major things that we actually wanted. But we must be again happy that this was the first time that we actually get a resolution condemning police brutality and discrimination of Africans and people of African descent in the US, and naming the US actually. Although some of the parts that were to be named as well, unfortunately, the Western European country, including Germany, we were really surprised that they could go with Mr. Trump on this. That tells you the whole thing about the structural racism, as we say it, both the institutional and structural racism. It's the same oppressors, actually, that actually need to vote. It's the same oppressors that need to pass the laws. So until we can get these oppressors to see that these laws actually need to be passed, it's going to be a long haul. But yes, we are very happy that we got the resolution finally passed on the 19th of June. And it's the first of its kind. It's a step forward, I must say. We can't be all happy about it, but we are pleased, and we are very, we can't be very satisfied, but we are very happy that it passed in the first place and it's there. And we can leverage on this resolution to get future advancement. And also from us here back home, if I may say, in Spain, this is the first time that we actually get the media to actually talk about us in a whole week. This is the first time, so I must say we are very pleased about this. We organized the Black Lives Matter protest on the 7th of June, 2 Sundays or 3 Sundays ago, and we remove all of our logos. This is what tells you the impact that you will get when you come together across nations, across communities, locally, grassroots organization coming together to fight one goal, which is to get us to be visible and try to levy the present moment that we are on to fight police brutality. So the whole of Spain, we organize grassroots movements, grassroots organizations, and quickly in 2 weeks, we form the whole network to organize a very big protest here in Spain at 11 a.m. in the morning, where each and every one of us will protest in just on a concentration basis, as we have the far right box party trying to stop the protest in the first place. So we had to call it how we are calling it now, which was a concentration. And we managed to get the police to approve this. And we managed to do it in all the major cities of Spain at the same time and the same day. That was the first time. So this tells you a lot. When we mobilize, we forget about our own petty, small organizations, just as a whole, how we can achieve something that we actually want. This is a learning curve for us also, and we are very happy that we got the media to talk about us here in Spain for 1 week in a row, and we very much welcome this for ourselves and for the entire movement of the Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm.
I think that's really interesting what you're saying, and actually I was listening very closely to what you were describing, and you used the word or the words, it was the first time, quite a bit in all the kind of like activities you were describing, and I think that's very much what we're seeing across Europe, is a lot of first times that we've got this kind of media attention, that so many protests have happened. And I just wanted to ask again if you had anything to share about your specific network, because I know that you're mostly made up of women, but across Europe. So much of what you were describing was in the US and in Europe, but is there more ways in which you're connected across Europe that you could tell us about?
Yes. So our network is a European network for women of African descent. We are like a network of 6 organizations across Europe, and individual women of African descent, and actually African women who are direct migrants from Africa. So for us, we empower women, and we work to empower our youth as well. We first of all try to fight for us to be visible, because we are always really invisible. And we fight for recognition by the Spanish government and other governments across Europe, because most of the time we are not even recognized. As you can see, for example, the highest court in Spain, with the African descent woman that took them to court, that case is still in Hamburg and in the EU human rights court as we speak, because the highest court in Spain told this lady that they cannot be racist. There cannot be racist act in Spain when Spain is a Caucasian white country. So the highest court that's supposed to protect us was basically excluding that we never existed. So for us, as women here in Spain, Black, Muslim women, we are actually fighting for our own very existence. We are like, we do not exist. And also I wanted to bring attention to the Breonna Taylor case, the differences between us women and Black or brown men. When she was shot 8 times sleeping in her bed on 23rd of March, she was shot wrongly, thinking that it was her, but the actual culprit was already arrested, and the police shot her and her boyfriend. At the same time, the George Floyd murder happened. So you can see in the conversation, we tend to forget when it happened, depending on the gender of the person. Normally, it doesn't get the same media coverage. She's a woman, and that what happens to her was really, really terrible. But you can see the difference between her coverage and the George Floyd coverage. This is also one of the things that we fight for in our organization, to gain recognition that what happened to a man should be the same effect that's happening to a woman. If it's the same thing, you can see the differences between the coverage. And these are some of the intersectionality approach that we are having in our organization to try to get women to get the same recognition and rights like men.
Yeah. Exactly. I was thinking exactly that whilst you were explaining your work as a network, is that, you know, not only does organizations fighting against racism suffer from lack of coverage or visibility, but especially if you're if you have a gender kind of perspective, women also are kind of invisibilized, and there's not as much attention on police brutality that impacts on women. And I'm sure, I mean, everybody should know about the Say Her Name campaign. And I'm really glad, Shaban, that you brought that case up, because it happened almost at the same time as the George Floyd case, and yet we don't have as much information, or we don't talk as much about the Breonna Taylor case. But I think also in Europe, we struggle to have as much information on the instances in Europe, and we are noting down that there are cases of police brutality that target women. It's often in their homes, which is kind of interesting. So whilst they're asleep or at home, and I think that there's more that we can do to discuss this angle, this intersectional angle, more in the future. But I would like to just move on to the next question, and that's to you, Stella. I think, you know, following these deaths, of the death of George Floyd, we've seen so many protests and uprisings, many of which have been looking to take down statues. As someone that has been involved in decolonization campaigns, can you tell us a bit more about your work and how this whole movement is affecting your work? If you could unmute yourself, that would be great.
Absolutely. So, yeah, thank you very much. Well, I work for Hand in Hand Against Racism, and for the past 3 years, we have been working on a campaign called Decolonize the Local Communities, with a specific focus on our education, our libraries, our traditions, and our public spaces. Now, when it comes to public spaces, of course, we we consider that our society is now super diverse, and because of this super diversity, everybody needs to feel at home and represented in their society. But this is very absent. It's very absent in all echelons of our society here in Belgium. You don't see diversity in the media, you don't see diversity in the government, you don't see diversity in your local community, and you certainly do not see diversity in our public spaces. Now, when we talk about decolonization, people tend to link it specifically to a geopolitical interpretation of decolonization. But actually what we mean in Hand is that the mechanisms that were used during the colonial period to denigrate the colonized population, to belittle them, to negate their cultures and traditions for the benefit of the colonizer, and for the benefit of actually enabling the colonizer to be able to plunder their goods for the good of their own government. These same mechanisms of brainwashing and propaganda were the same mechanisms that were used here to brainwash their own people into thinking that they are superior, into thinking that it is their right to lord over the people of African descent, that it's their right to plunder from them because those people are too dumb or too, incapable of handling their goods. So the plundering continued from the colonization period, from the time that they took the ivory, they took the rubber, the copper. To date, they're still extracting cobalt, they're still extracting copper, and so on. And so we are trying to tell people in Belgium that they have to address these mechanisms, because these mechanisms have become embedded in our society, in all echelons of society, and they're having an impact. They're manifesting themselves in really institutional, structural racism that is evident in our education system. It's evident in our, it's creating a lot of disadvantages to the people of African descent when it comes to labor, to housing, to health, to education, really on every single level. Now, if I can bring us back to your question on monuments, we have been for a long time campaigning, like I say, for the past 3 years, campaigning to have also a recognition or acknowledgement of people of African descent in the public spaces. But at the same time, we have been pushing for the monuments or street names that honor criminals of the colonization period to be removed from these public spaces. This, of course, is not going to be heard because, like Shaban brought up, the decision-making, the people who are going to make the decisions, who are going to take the decisions about these monuments are the same people who are in power, who are the oppressors, which makes it really a mute case. But now, in the wake of this, the murder of George Floyd, in the wake of all these protests globally, in the wake of all this momentum that we are experiencing, there has been a change. In the beginning, for example, here in Belgium, there was a tendency to say that has got nothing to do with Belgium. It's George Floyd. It's in America. We don't have racism here. 2-3 days ago, the leader of the right-wing party, Bart de Wever, said there's no racism in Flanders. It's a question of identity. And, you know, I don't know why you're whining. And the next day, the very next day, the headline was 4 policemen who are arrested precisely because of police brutality and stealing from people who are undocumented. They stole systematically from people who are undocumented. This was in the media just yesterday or the day before, just the day after Bart de Wever spoke. Now, for us, we are trying to tell them that the problem is very much Belgian. In 1978, I believe, no, in I forget the date, but Samira Adamu is more than 20 years, 25 years. Samira Adamu was killed in a manner that was similar to George Floyd. She was suffocated with a cushion, you know, as they tried to transport her back to her country.
Yes.
And it's funny, when I heard the George Floyd thing, Samira came to my head and I was like, oh my God, it's happening. It's still happening even now. So in Belgium, we've got a whole list of cases, but I have been in the news to talk about the monuments, and I picked a very specific monument, which is the monument of Camille Coquillard. Belgium, as you know, is very well known for the policy of chopping off the hands, so that they could get the Congolese to work. If they were not working to the what do you call it, to the satisfaction of the colonizer, their hand would be chopped off. But the person, the individual, the governor general who introduced this policy and implemented it was Camille Coquillard, and he has a monument in the King Albert Park in Antwerp, you know. And I was like, what? I mean, how can he have this monument? How can we honor this? I mean, there are other monuments where people would have a little bit of, you know, benefit of doubt. But this man, at some point, had the largest number of, the largest collection of chopped hands. I rest my case. This monument must go.
It must go.
Yeah,
it must go. I must admit, when I saw the image of, for those of you that don't know, I'm from the UK, but I live in Belgium. But when I saw the statue of Edward Colston just pushed into the river in Bristol, I mean, I've watched that video countless times. So although these acts seem symbolic, I think, Stella, thank you for drawing on the wider implications, why the statues, it's important to understand the history, the full history, the colonial history, especially. It's often, people aren't often aware of this information, and this is why it's become such an important subject. And I think that this idea of like colonial amnesia is really important, because a lot of policymakers don't know how involved that these old monuments, or the people who are venerated in some way, have been involved in this really barbaric colonial history. So thank you very much, Stella, for kind of explaining that to us. And I will just move on to Liban, because I know you haven't had a chance to say anything yet, Liban. So if you don't mind unmuting yourself, because I just want to ask you, actually, you know, you've heard about what's going on in Spain. We've talked a little bit about the US, also about Belgium, and I know that you're from Finland. So what's happening in Finland? How is this affecting Finland, which seems quite far away right now? But go ahead, tell us about your work in Finland.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Nice. I'm actually wearing a T-shirt, Football Against Fascism. So this seemed suitable, but Black Lives Matter movement has affected Finland in multiple ways. And I think basically because racism or structural anti-Blackness haven't been very discussed topic in Finland. So when George Floyd got murdered by police in United States, then in Finland we had a lot of solidarity protests. Yes, what have been happening so far is that in big cities there has been solidarity for Black Lives Matter from Finland protests, and the biggest one has been in capital Helsinki, and then we have had big ones in Tampere, in Turku, in central Finland, in northern Finland, in big cities. And I have been speaking in couple and supporting others. And the point has been that firstly, to show solidarity for the situation in the United States, to demand international reactions, to demand that Finland is not silent in this situation, but also to address structural discrimination, racial discrimination in Finland. And it has been quite, how could I phrase it, fresh or new kind of discussion, because in a couple of years we have had multiple research or reports of discrimination in Finland, and 2018 Human Rights Agency in EU made report which stated that in Finland we have a huge issue with anti-Black racism, and we have basically nothing mechanisms or ways to address that. So when the EU made a report, then it kind of made in the headlines in Finland a couple of years ago, and this year at June, like a couple of weeks ago, the Finnish non-discrimination ombudsman, which is a governmental body, made first a study about anti-Black discrimination or racism in Finland, and the numbers were quite huge also. So in this situation, when we have Black Lives Matter movement and solidarity protests around the world, we have also a couple studies stating that it's not problem in the United States only, it's affecting also quite strongly in Finland, but we are lacking ways to discuss and ways to handle or manage this structural or direct racism. And what we are doing here in Finland, Anti-Racist Forum is a small NGO. I don't know if it's if you know about the ARF, but it's based in Finland, and as many small NGOs, it tries to address racism through education or through research or through forum days. We have annual forum days where we discuss about whiteness or have only for people of color panels and expert discussions which challenges whiteness in Finland. And also we are advocating for racial equality data, which our chairperson Amira Salehodin is doing as her PhD. In Finland, one of the challenges is that we don't collect a racial data because that's seen as a possible discrimination. So we don't really have any statistics of how minorities are affected through different policies. Mm-hmm. And also in Finland, we have had one proven case where police has murdered or through police actions some person from African diaspora have been killed, and that's only one situation which is publicly known, but we don't have any data which shows the statistics of police brutality, because we don't collect and because it's not an issue we really discuss here. And also Anti-Racist Forum have had first and maybe only preparation course Arva Valmennus towards universities, which means that we have held a preparation course for only people of color, only brown and black students trying to achieve university study place. So that kind of proactive anti-racist work we try to do. And at the moment, I'm also a chairperson of a national youth movement called Left Youth in Finland. So through my daily work, I try to build a grassroots movement which are more anti-racist, and we work through youth movement and also through class-conscious movements. And there's not many black or brown people at the moment in parliamentary in Finland or in politics generally. And we have also quite strong and big far-right party in Finland called Perussuomalaiset, true Finns of Finland. So the political climate is not very anti-racist. It's more kind of like when we try to address anti-racism, there is backlash and tendency to talk about immigrations or that kind of stuff. Please go on.
No, I think this is a common theme that's been kind of raised both with Shaban and Stella and you, Liban, this lack of representation in the political kind of space. This is a problem when we're trying to think about solutions and what our demands are, which is kind of the next question that I want to ask you all, which is we published a briefing on police brutality across Europe, because we really were seeing that there was not enough acknowledgement that there's a problem in the US. We're constantly referring to George Floyd and America as having a problem with police brutality, but we know very, very well that it happens in Europe. So we put together this briefing, which is really mostly about information of police brutality in Europe. But we start to think about some recommendations. What would we demand as a European network against racism? So this is my question to you, but before you answer it, I just would like to remind people who are watching live now that if you put some questions in the comments on Facebook, then we will hopefully have time to ask them at the end. So I'll ask you all individually, but if you could keep your answers as simple as possible, like if you could give me one reflection on the recommendations that we've already outlined, and maybe one solution if you have that's not already been discussed, and we'll go around and then we'll go to more comments and questions from the audience. But I will ask you first, Shaban. I will go straight to you. So if you want to unmute yourself, and ask you, you know, what do you think of the recommendations we've designed so far, and what would be one other solution that we haven't already identified, if there is one?
Yeah, I was reading at them. I was looking at them last night, and I saw that you actually touched on most of the things going on and what we already have been recommending to the Spanish government here on police brutality. If I may, I will give you one example of what we did on the Black Lives Matter movement on that protest on the 7th of June again. As we speak here in Spain, we have hundreds of deaths due to police violence, but they are not documented. So the March day, we had like a list of 40, the first 40. So we had to pick the first 30. So we had these 40, they were there. Nobody talked about them. And the police or the local police or national police, because we have different types of police here, or the autonomic police, they have not been accountable for these crimes. And also, we don't have any data that publishes police brutality or police violence on a yearly basis or on a 6-month basis for us to see how many complaints the police receive, their names, and what sort of complaints. I think this is also one of our recommendations that we could add, that police brutality must be published across Europe on a yearly or 6-monthly basis. And also it must be published in details of the offense, the name of the police officer involved and what was the offense and what was done for this offense. This is really key for accountability and to stopping structural racism and police violence, because as we know it's really structural, it's within the police, it's like a culture. So,
yeah.
So for us, being Black or brown in Europe, it's automatically makes you like 5 times more likely to be stopped and searched or be killed by a police than if you are white, for example. So when people tell us about all life matter, for example, I say, yes, I understand you, I get you, all life matter. But also if you look at the stats, some life, according to the structural racism, the way the system is structured, they are not all mattering the same way. So for my color, I'm more likely to be treated differently than a white person. So the argument of all life matter for us, we cannot see this as equal, right?
Well, to be honest, I don't even want us to bring that into the discussion, because I think it's something that we within our network start to vision what we would like, not to accommodate other people's perceptions or demands. No, I think this is our space for us to kind of discuss and think ourselves, which I think, Shaban, I think the data collection point is really, really important, and I'm realizing that more and more, actually, and Liban also mentioned it too. Stella, I don't know if you have any thoughts, some reflections on the recommendations, and then if you want to unmute yourself, please go ahead.
Yes. By chance, today, oh God, I've been bombarded with webinars. So today I have been in a meeting with an action group to sit together and see how, an action group on police brutality and ethnic profiling, on how we can really consolidate our efforts and get some really concrete and structural change. We decided in that meeting that it is high time that we worked with professional lawyers. So we often work with practice lawyers in Belgium who are very amenable to our problem. They are the same lawyers whom we approached when we were working on the whole project on mystery calls or practice practice calls for the labor market. And they are also the same lawyers who defended our case when the government introduced the deportation law, which unfortunately we lost, but it's a very, very cruel law that where people can just deport people, criminals or people who they think are criminals at will. Now, there's it's very, very important to use this momentum to not just wait for that pat on the shoulder or some lip service. It's the moment now to demand for structural change. The moment now to insert, for example, as Shaban describes, really structural ways of collecting data and documenting and archiving case studies, archiving archiving victims' stories and narratives, so that people can stop saying that it doesn't exist. So we have to find a very broad-based way of accumulating this data, factual data, but also the narratives which don't make it to court. We need to accumulate all this data. We need to, besides the data, which will give some body to the people like the practice lawyers, so that they can go and start writing real recommendations on ratifying the law, and ratifying the law so that it can address this issue in a legal way, in a legal system. We want structural change that will impact upon us long after we have ridden this momentum, and long after we have lived, so that our children can live in better times.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I really like the way that you've linked this, demand for data with trying to challenge structural racism. I think the two are linked. We need to know more about what the situation is on the ground, and then we can also address some of the structural problems that we are faced with. Liban, I have to really rush you, but I really want to hear. I know you're probably going to say something about equality data collection. You're into research, I'm a researcher, but is there something more that you want to say on kind of solutions and recommendations?
I would like to add that funding, understanding, and power to implement is, to me, the most acute problems. And in Finland, we have started to make the first program against structural racism. It's the historical and first one in Finland. So it has to be funded properly. And then I would like to address the problem of underreporting, that in Finland, I think we don't have enough funds for police to address racial discrimination and hate crimes and speech people face daily. And when people don't feel that they can report, it's not clear how you report these, it's not clear who is responsible, and the sanctions is not clear. And also the attitude in police and people who addresses these, there is no education about anti-racism, there is no culture who takes it seriously, and there is no funding for that. So funding and power to implement.
Okay, I was quite surprised that you mentioned that, but I think that's a key thing. I'm going to wrap up with one final question, because we are past our 45 minutes. But this is a kind of question that's come from the network already, and I think this follows on from what you were saying a little bit, Liban, because I think that it's right to ask for funding for some of these initiatives, but I think we are also in a position where we need to think, how do we do this ourselves as organizations? So if we're always relying on this kind of elite who doesn't reflect who we are to either change the laws or give us funding, we're always going to be in a similar position. So the question was really around police brutality, because we probably know someone, if not ourselves, who have experienced police brutality. So how do we as a network keep ourselves safe? How do we vision a society without the police? I know that you probably don't have all the answers, but I just wanted to hear if somebody has kind of thoughts and reflections on that. Go ahead, Stella.
Right, thank you. We had a case not so long ago of this child, a young boy who was thrown into the rail lines. And the reaction, the response of the people of African descent was amazing, because they rallied. I mean, we sometimes underestimate the expertise that we have now. So they rallied and just dealt with the problem. Initially, the media reported it as an affray. And so they said, you know, there was a fight and they caused a disturbance of the peace. And we're like, what? It was child abuse. This kid was just barely, what, 14? And the white people were 43 and above. They were above the 40s. They were clearly drunk. They had alcohol and everything. So we approached the media and we said, this is not child abuse. This is racist. I mean, this is not an affray. This is racism. So our experts in the media approached the media and made them change it, made them block the child's face, made them change the story to a blatant racist attack. Within our group, we managed to rally up a psychiatrist from among us to go and handle the child. We managed to rally up somebody to go to the school and also talk to the children in the school, because also the classmates are suffering. We managed to rally up lawyers who could go together with the family and visit the police. We managed to do some GoFundMe and give some funding so that they could pay for all this together. We came to the realization that if we do not mobilize ourselves with the expertise that we already have, nothing is going to be done for us. So there is no first line procedure to handle such a case. It does not exist. We have to sort of recreate these first line procedures as we go along, and we need to start utilizing the expertise that we have. Right now, we've got incredible untapped expertise, which we can use, and we need to start creating a website or an archive of all this. Among us, we also have some youth who have created an app. We need to have an app where people can then know exactly who to contact when they are caught up in such a situation. So we have to kind of rewrite our situation and recreate it, and not vigilante. I'm not talking about vigilantism. I'm talking about our expertise. Rally each other up and deal with it. We need to deal with it.
I think that's an important point, to remind ourselves that actually we have a lot of expertise within our communities, is how we can link up and exchange. Liban, I think you have your hand up, so please go ahead and answer the question.
Yes, thank you. And I think Stella had a great point, and thank you for that. I would like to add that most of the problems when we talk about racism, it's important to understand the mechanism of where we address socio-economical problems, racialized problems. So when we discuss about the majority of people, in example, in Finland, and the question is about socio-economical ills or problems, then we address them as a socio-economical problems. But when we discuss about minority and there is same problems, we discuss about minority or racial problems. So to me, important is to have also like socio-economical autonomy, and it's important to think about how we are funded or how we raise money to do important anti-racist work without state or state apparatus, or without depending of funding from the state. And also I want to be clear when I say that there is need to be enough money for addressing hate crimes. It's about that addressing hate crimes is not funded enough. But also when we talk about funding police, it's important to understand that most of the problems like mental health issues or that kind of situations where police is called is not really a work suited for police. So we need also, there is need to police to be defunded and more resources addressed to social work and addressing socio-economical problems, as I said before. Thank you.
Okay, I'm really pleased that you clarified that for me, and forgive me for misunderstanding your point on funding. And actually, you've kind of reflected a little bit what we had put in the recommendations, but in a much more articulate way. I mean, it's about how we think about investing in kind of social justice programs and policies, and less about how we focus on funding kind of policing in some ways. And I would like us to think more and more about that. Shaban, you have really like 1 minute. I might have to stop you. So go ahead. Unmute yourself if you can.
Okay, thinking about solutions on police violence. Yes, I want to second what my colleagues, both of them, were saying. I just want to add, if something that I can add on it, it's mobilization, grassroots mobilization like we are doing now, sharing also of information, empowering each other in the network, sharing of information, and naming the victims, and working on sensitizing our communities on the police violence, and giving them the information that they can report. They can feel free. They don't need to be fair to report, and to empower them to know that there are laws that could cover them, and they will be protected, because most of the time, especially our women in grassroots communities, when they face police violence, because they are already invisible, they normally don't say it. It's like in the case of Spain here recently, just last week, there was an African descent woman that was brutally hit by police in a village just outskirts of Barcelona, and this audio went really viral. But then these are things that really happened, but we don't know them, except that now it's been video or it's been audioed. But they actually happen. This is our daily struggle. So we need to voice them out. We need to help. Throwing them out there, sharing information to the key stakeholders that are in power, the ones that can change things, because these are things that happen to us on a daily basis. The only difference now, it's because it's been filmed or audioed. So I would say, yes, we need to be empowering each other. We cannot rely 100% on the states or the government to fund us in funding. We can also use our own expertise, because the time is now, and we got to be the change. We are the change, and we need to make the change. Nobody else will do it for us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to end on that point, because that was perfectly put. We're running out of time, so I'm just going to quickly wrap up and say, thank you so much, Shaban. Thank you, Stella. Thank you, Liban. There was such a rich conversation there. I'm really happy that we actually started to discuss some of these solutions. The series will continue. We have another discussion with some more ENAR members, and maybe some people outside of ENAR members. I would like the conversation to continue, like talking about some of the solutions and how we can work together. But thank you so much for giving us this time and sharing all this knowledge and expertise and your work. And I get a lot of energy from speaking to you, and I would like to give it back to you as well. So thank you very much for all your work. And I also just really quickly, before we stop going live, say very much thank you to Ezra and Sanka, who are behind the scenes working on this. So thank you, everyone. And I will say goodbye. And we'll see each other again sometime soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for putting this together. I'm very satisfied, and it's really important. It's a conversation that needs to continue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.